Hello, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. The 3-week trial begins for 3 men involved in the 2022 Coutts border blockade. Plus, Manitoba unveils its new budget for 2024. It includes an extension of the province's fuel tax holiday and a $1 billion boost in healthcare. And the strongest earthquake in a quarter century rocks Taiwan during the morning rush hour.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks so much for joining us. The 3-week trial began today for 3 men charged for their role in the Coutts border blockade over pandemic health restrictions. Marco Van Hugenbos, Alex Van Herk, and Gerard Jansen are charged with mischief over $5,000. Jurors were picked on Tuesday after candidates were quizzed about their opinions about COVID-19 restrictions and the blockade that paralyzed a major Canada-U.S. border crossing. BCN's Naveen Day was at the Lethbridge courthouse and joins me now. Naveen, can you tell us what took place on day 1 of this trial?
Well, Jeanette, the trial for the 3 men charged was delayed this morning due to concerns over jury selection. It was believed that a juror's spouse was potentially involved in law enforcement at the time of the Coutts border blockade. The Crown and Defense Counsel deliberated over whether the member of the 14-person jury should be excluded. During yesterday's jury selection, a man who was selected as a jury member said he supported the cause but didn't believe in the accused actions. And a woman was excluded when she was asked about her impartiality. She responded saying she would try, but may be a little biased. And a man whose grandfather died in a senior's home during the pandemic, and another who said he felt strongly about the blockade but didn't specify why, were also excused. Following a private meeting with the juror in question, judge and counsel, the trial began with an 8-man, 6-woman jury in attendance, 12 of whom will serve as jurors, and 2 alternates who will be excluded from final deliberations. All of the accused have each pleaded not guilty to mischief over $5,000. Crown Prosecutor Stephen Johnston told the jury that this trial for the 3 men charged has nothing to do with their beliefs or right to protest. He said one cannot obstruct the use of a highway in order to achieve a goal, adding the 3 accused played a key role in blocking Highway 4 at Coutts. Prior to these comments, Justice Keith Yamauchi gave jurors their instructions and went over policies and procedures. He stressed to them that the 3 men are presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Shortly before adjourning for the morning, the Crown made opening statements, which included a list of witnesses that will testify, beginning with former Coutts Mayor Jim Willits. The trial is scheduled to run until April the 19th. Jeanette?
Thanks so much, Naveen. Well, the bodies of 6 foreign aid workers killed in a series of Israeli strikes have been transported out of the Gaza Strip ahead of their repatriation. The bodies were driven across the Egyptian border at the Rafah crossing on Wednesday. The 3 British citizens, a Polish citizen, an Australian, and a Canadian-American dual national worked for World Central Kitchen, an international charity. Their Palestinian driver was also killed. Israel has acknowledged carrying out the strikes by mistake and says it has launched an independent investigation. In other news, the strongest earthquake in a quarter century has rocked Taiwan during the morning rush hour. Wednesday's quake killed at least 9 people, stranded dozens of workers at quarries, and sent some residents scrambling out of windows of damaged buildings. The quake, which also injured more than 1,000 people, collapsed buildings in a southern city and created a tsunami that washed ashore on Japanese islands. Taiwan's earthquake monitoring agency gave the magnitude as 7.2, while the U.S. Geological Survey put it at 7.5. And closer to home, the federal government is setting aside another $15 billion in the upcoming budget for its apartment construction loan program. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the funding will help build another 30,000 apartments within the next 10 years.
So our budget this year is about building an economy that is fair for everyone. And one of the things that really doesn't feel very fair these days is the price of housing. It used to be that if you worked hard at a good job, you could afford a roof over your head. Well, today we're announcing that upcoming Budget 2024 will invest in a new initiative we're calling Canada Builds. Canada Builds is going to turbocharge affordable apartment construction in partnership with provinces and territories. It'll provide low-cost loans, help speed up development, and build projects at the scale necessary to meet the urgent needs of Canadians.
The Manitoba government is delivering on promised rebates and tax cuts in its spring budget, while also changing property taxes in a way that will see many homeowners and commercial property owners pay more. The NDP government's first budget since last October's election also promises $2.5 million for the development of a supervised consumption site.
Under the last government, taxes were raised on renters in Manitoba, and we know renters are seniors, people on fixed incomes, and that significantly increased the challenges they were facing in this climate. So we're really proud that this budget brings forward a renter's tax credit that will raise the benefits for renters to make life easier and more affordable for them. And this is just the first step of our plan to continue making life more affordable for renters.
This is a plan to be able to make good on so many of the promises that we were elected by Manitobans to deliver on. When we see the addictions crisis in our province, we know that young people, people of all ages, people of every demographic, every geographic region in our province are struggling right now. And we are going to take steps to hold people who are bringing toxic drugs into our communities accountable. But at the same time, if you're somebody who had an addiction and you access a poison drug supply, that shouldn't be a death sentence. And no longer are we going to leave some tools in the toolkit and not use them for ideological reasons. We are stepping up to ensure that every tool that we have to combat the addictions crisis is going to be used.
The current reality is that there's transmission of infectious diseases. There's a loss of life. I mean any loss of life, but nearly 500 losses of life is totally unacceptable, and that's a tragedy. Like I said, consumption is occurring. I think safe consumption is an opportunity to establish a relationship with the individual that is living with an addiction and give them hope and connect them with the right resources and supports that they might need.
We've seen major cuts to education. We're seeing taxes go up between 6 to 17%. And then on top of all of that, they're getting rid of the education tax off of properties. Yes, they're giving a bit of a rebate, but actually when you really drill down to it, it's going to be a significant loss to Manitobans, and I think it's going to hurt more people than it's going to help.
An extension of Manitoba's fuel tax holiday was among the measures announced in Tuesday's budget. The 14 cents a litre tax was suspended at the beginning of the year and was to be reinstated on July 1st. Manitoba's provincial government is also saying it's committing to a $1 billion boost in healthcare within the new budget. Alberta's government is investing $224.8 million through Budget 2024 to help train more physicians in rural areas. Minister of Advanced Education Rajan Asani made the announcement today at the University of Lethbridge that the province is trying to address the physician shortage by collaborating efforts with the University of Alberta, University of Calgary, the University of Lethbridge, and Northwestern Polytechnic to develop new rural medical education training programs in Lethbridge and Grand Prairie.
Funding by Alberta's government will enable the University of Alberta, University of Calgary, Northwestern Polytechnic, and the University of Lethbridge to develop 2 new rural medical education program training centres. The University of Alberta will partner with Northwestern Polytechnic to develop a new training centre in Grand Prairie. And the University of Calgary will partner with the University of Lethbridge to develop the other new training centre right here in Lethbridge. Both training centres will provide academic instruction with hands-on healthcare education. Students in the Doctor of Medicine program at the new training centres will learn alongside other health professionals. They will gain practical experience in the clinical component of their program by serving rural patients.
It will take approximately 6 years from today's announcement until the first grads, or about 60 new physicians, are working in the field. For the second year in a row, the province is increasing its budget for the Aboriginal Business Investment Fund. Over 2 years, it's doubled the grant program from $5 million in 2022 to $10 million in annual funding for Indigenous community-owned businesses. Today, Minister of Indigenous Relations Rick Wilson joined leaders from Montana First Nation to announce how this funding will help a greenhouse just outside of Ponoka, Alberta.
So the Academic Fresh Greenhouse is owned by Montana First Nation. It received a $500,000 ABIF grant to help purchase the capital and infrastructure it needed to get it going. So they're working on expanding the greenhouse this summer, and when complete, it's going to employ up to 16 staff, and it's going to bring in about $330,000 revenue. Pretty impressive. For a small business, that's amazing. So it's really outstanding to see what you've done, and I'm so proud that Alberta's government could be just a small part of that journey with you. And that's what the Aboriginal Business Investment Fund is all about.
Over the past decade, the Aboriginal Business Investment Fund has provided capital gains to more than 85 Indigenous business projects and helped create more than 800 jobs for Indigenous people. Edmonton police say an 11-year-old boy is dead following a dog attack Monday evening. EPS responded to reports of the attack just before 8 p.m. at a home near 82nd Street and 11th Avenue Southwest. When officers arrived, they found an 11-year-old boy who was severely injured. Police attempted to provide life-saving measures until paramedics arrived on the scene and declared the child dead. Police say 2 large dogs were seized by animal control peace officers. The dogs were owned by the owner of the home, and the child was reportedly visiting at the time of the incident. According to a report, no use of force was used in 99% of calls to the Lethbridge Police Service last year. The 2023 use of force data was recently presented to the Lethbridge Police Commission. It says last year, Lethbridge Police responded to nearly 38,000 calls for service, and 99.5% were resolved without any use of force. The 0.5% of cases where force was used involved 217 subjects. There were no fatalities and, in most circumstances, no visible injuries. Millions of people have experienced childhood trauma. Today, I speak with Michael Menard, who has experienced trauma during his childhood and has written a book called The Kite That Couldn't Fly. In it, he shares on the signs children exhibit while going through trauma and after effects adults should show later in life.
A child lashing out, a child being inappropriate with sexual talk or sexual action, anger, fits, wanting to hurt other people. That's what you see in children. And that's when it's happening. But years later, talking about people, adults from, let's say, 21 to death, what you find in those people are depression, anxiety, flare-ups, relationships in turmoil constantly for no real reason, health issues.
Catch more of this powerful interview with author Michael Menard on recognizing childhood trauma coming up later in the program. A plan has been launched to feed a stranded killer whale calf that has been alone in a remote tidal lagoon off of northern Vancouver Island for almost 2 weeks after its pregnant mother died. Paul Cottrell, a marine mammal coordinator with the Federal Fisheries Department, says the young orca appears healthy and remains active.
It's a very narrow, shallow channel, so yeah, to navigate in must been very dangerous in itself. And the mom got caught on the sandbar behind us and live stranded and died, unfortunately. So you can see how shallow it is. This is a dynamic, high current area, and the calf unfortunately is on the other side of the sandbar, and we have looked at some measures to try to persuade the animal out, and these are measures that have worked in other situations for killer whales and other marine mammals, but it was successful for manipulating movement in the lagoon, but it was not enough to persuade the animal to go over the sandbar.
The 2024 Women's World Hockey Championship is the first of the Professional Women's Hockey League era. Canadian players feel confident in their game and in their chances of reclaiming the gold medal.
A lot of players are coming in more game ready than they've ever been, just in terms of the volume of the players coming from that league. So I think there's going to be, some high level plays happening out there. I think there's an added excitement, I think, for fans, especially North American fans who now know a lot of these European players more because maybe they play for their favorite PWHL club. So I think it's just exciting on both fronts.
The Women's World Hockey Championship games run from April 3rd through 14th in Utica, New York. And speaking of hockey, the Lethbridge Hurricanes could face elimination tonight as they take on the Swift Current Broncos in Game 4 of the first round playoff matchup. Last night, the Broncos beat the Canes 5-3 to take a commanding 3-0 lead in the series. The Canes are on the verge of being swept for the third straight season if they don't win Game 4 tonight at NMAX Center. The puck drops at 7 p.m. Here in southern Alberta, there is a rich history of stories about the people who made this area what it is today. And there are fun tidbits of history that we can learn about Lethbridge. Lorianne Johansson, Vice President of the Lethbridge Historical Society, shares the truth about how Lethbridge got its name.
Lethbridge was named after William Lethbridge. He was the president and largest shareholder of the Northwestern Coal and Navigation Company. You know how the NMAX Center is named after the sponsor, NMAX? Lethbridge is something similar to that. He got the city named after him because of his money that he invested into the company. He never actually visited Lethbridge at all, not even once.
Catch the rest of my interview with Lorianne Johansson from the Lethbridge Historical Society coming up after business news. Well, it was a windy one in Lethbridge today with winds gusting from 50 to 70 kilometers per hour, but the temperature was nice with the mercury soaring to 17 degrees, which puts us above seasonal. I'll be back with a full look at the weather across the country right after this short break. Welcome back. Well, our nice weather is about to go from pluses to minuses, actually some zeros there, and then back up to pluses again. So we're going to have a little bit of everything coming up this week. Starting this evening, we are going to see some showers, and then tomorrow, Thursday, we got showers mixed with some snow there. Could expect up to 5 centimeters of snow tomorrow. The good news, though, we are looking at winds dying down to 20 kilometers per hour from today's 70K. So that's the good news. High of 0 for the next 3 days. Friday, looking at flurries as well, snow as well on Saturday, high 0, up to 6 on a Sunday with mainly cloudy skies. And then look at that, a pair of 14s on Monday and a Tuesday for next week. So hopefully that's the end of the snow for now. Anyways, average high for this time of year, 10 degrees. Average low, -3. 23 was our high temperature on this day. That happened back in 1944. And in 1972, we had the chilliest, which was a record -19 for this day. 7:02, that's when the sun rose this morning, and our sun set this evening at 8:07, and that's looking like 13 hours and 5 minutes to me. Okay, as we get to the west coast tomorrow, we're looking at a high of 12 degrees in Victoria, up to 10 degrees in Vancouver. So nice to have those double digits there. Edmonton looking at a high of 2 degrees, mix of sun and cloud. In Calgary, high of 1 degree. Same thing as Lethbridge, looking at 5 centimeters of snow tomorrow. As we look to the rest of the prairie, 6 for a high in Saskatoon, seeing some showers, 16 in Regina, and 9 degrees in Winnipeg with clear skies. As we get to the central part of the country, we are also seeing a lot of snow here as well. Toronto looking at 5 centimeters of snow, could see that mixed with some rain, 3 degrees for a high. Ottawa and Montreal both under a snowfall warning tonight into Thursday. Could see up to 15 centimeters tonight and 5 more tomorrow. In Ottawa, high of 1 degree, 1 for a high in Montreal tomorrow as well. Could see up to 10 centimeters tonight and up to 5 more tomorrow. As we get into Atlantic Canada, Fredericton also seeing 5 centimeters. Same thing for Halifax, mixed with some rain there, high of 3 degrees. Charlottetown seeing a mix of drizzle and snow as well, high of 4 degrees, and up to 2 degrees tomorrow in St. John's, Newfoundland, with 60% chance of rain mixed with some snow there. So there you have it. That is your forecast. WestJet Encore pilots have approved a strike mandate, which means that they could walk off the job as soon as April 17th. The Airline Pilots Association says aviators at WestJet's regional carrier voted 97% in favor of strike authorization after contract talks came to a virtual standstill. The head of the union's WestJet Encore contingent says its workers are among the lowest paid regional pilots in Canada, noting some are seeking jobs elsewhere because of it. A new report from Deloitte Canada warns that drought in Western Canada poses a risk to the country's natural gas industry. Both Northeast BC and Northwest Alberta are the epicenter of natural gas drilling in Canada, and both regions are facing extreme drought conditions this year. The concern stems from the fact that most natural gas drilling in those areas involves hydraulic fracturing, a process that uses large amounts of fresh water to extract resources from the earth. Regulators in BC and Alberta have warned industrial users could face water restrictions this summer if drought persists. And now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 37 points on the day to finish at 22,112. The Dow was down 43 points to 39,127. The S&P 500 was up 5 on the day to 5211. And the Nasdaq was up 37 points to finish at 16,277. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 28 cents to 85.43 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 2 cents to $1.84 US. Gold was up $19.33 to 2,300 US an ounce, and silver was up $1.04 to 27.18 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.35 per bushel. Barley is at $6.35. Canola is at $13.55, and corn is at $7.44 per bushel. Live cattle were down 85 cents to $1.8093. Feeder cattle were down $2.55 to $2.4095. Lean hogs were up $1.43 to $87.98. And the Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours to 73.93 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, the 3-week trial began today for 3 men charged for their role in the Coutts border blockade over pandemic health restrictions. Marco Van Hugenbos, Alex Van Herk, and Gerard Jansen are charged with mischief over $5,000. The Crown made opening statements which included a list of witnesses that will testify, beginning with former Coutts Mayor Jim Willett. The trial is scheduled to run until April 19th. Coming up, I speak with Lorianne Johansson, Vice President of the Lethbridge Historical Society, who shares insights on the development of our city and southern Alberta. And hey, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also, be sure to visit our website anytime to check out a number of stories and interviews. Well, Lethbridge and southern Alberta have a fascinating, rich history to look back upon, and we perhaps don't take enough time to reflect upon it, but today's guest is going to help us do just that. Lorianne Johansson is the Vice President of the Lethbridge Historical Society. Welcome to Bridge City News, Lorianne. Great to have you on today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I always love to talk about Lethbridge's history.
Awesome. Okay, well, with that said, maybe give our viewers a brief snapshot of what your organization is all about. It's not just Lethbridge history, right? But southern Alberta, all of southern Alberta?
That's correct.
Okay.
So the Lethbridge Historical Society is a chapter of the Historical Society of Alberta. Our chapter covers the southern Alberta region, sort of from just south of Calgary down to the border. So it does encompass quite a lot of southern Alberta, including all of the small towns. They are free to access our resources, and we do a lot of work with them as well. We do tend to focus on Lethbridge because that's where we're based, but we do also cover a lot of other things in the region.
Okay, great. Well, maybe give us an idea of what takes place at a typical meeting or gathering of the Lethbridge Historical Society.
Well, we have several different options as far as gatherings. On the fourth Tuesday of every month during September through April, we host a general meeting for our membership. where we conduct a little bit of business and then we move into a presentation format. We invite guest speakers from all different walks of life come and speak to our members and guests about things that are relevant or interesting. We've had horticulture, and we've had how to plant a victory garden in your front yard or backyard. We've had it was fascinating as what kind of vegetables you can grow in southern Alberta that you can then turn around and eat to be a little bit more self-sustaining and environmentally conscious. That was a really great one. We've talked about our plaques and monuments project. Anything that really would be fascinating or interesting to our membership and to the general public. So that's one of the ways. We do also conduct tours, walking tours of the city and local area. Some of them are the Downtown History and Beer Tour, which most people are familiar with. That was initiated by the LHS here. And we do some for general public. We do some for the membership. So we have a lot of tours that take place throughout the year. We have several coming up actually over the next few months. And then the other thing is to join the executive council and sit on the board with the rest of the team. So that happens on Monday. So there's several different ways to get involved.
It sounds like it. So obviously this is something people can join in. How can people maybe join up for your group?
The easiest way is to attend one of the general meetings and sign up for your membership with one of the executive that's there. We do also have a website, lethbridgehistory.org, and memberships are available through there, as well as a contact us form. So if you have questions, you can certainly submit an email request and somebody will be able to guide you through becoming a member.
Okay, so why don't we begin with the name of the city? So I think a lot of people assume the name Lethbridge stems from the famous bridge that spans the coulees, but that isn't necessarily the case now, is it?
It's not at all the case, actually. Lethbridge was named after William Lethbridge. He was the president and largest shareholder of the Northwestern Coal and Navigation Company. You know how the NMAX Center is named after the sponsor, NMAX? Lethbridge is something similar to that. He got the city named after him because of his money that he invested into the company. He never actually visited Lethbridge at all, not even once.
Oh, wow. Well, that's disappointing. So it all comes down to money, right?
Unfortunately, that's the case. It has been for a long time.
It's a little bit more of a romantic notion to think it's about the bridge, really.
Sure.
I can see why the rumor got started.
Absolutely. It makes sense, but it's completely a coincidence that it's Lethbridge and we have a bridge.
And then we become Bridge City. Yes, I know. That's so interesting. So, I mean, speaking of the bridge, that iconic high-level bridge is often referred to as the longest in the world. And there are, of course, longer bridges elsewhere, but I believe it's still the longest of its specific type in the world. Can you maybe share a little bit about the history of that bridge?
Of course, the bridge is in fact the longest for its height and style in the world. Nobody has built anything that's longer and higher of the same style trestle bridge.
And that would be like a trestle bridge, yeah.
That's right, yeah. Okay. It was announced in 1906 and completed 3 years later. It is still the largest single railway structure in Canada. It was put into place to shorten the trip to Fort Macleod. Instead of having to go down and around the river valley, the bridge was put in place so that they could just skip over the top and shave off several hours at least of their train journey. The walls on the side of the bridge, you've seen them there, they're to make sure that the trains don't get pushed off by our wind, our beautiful wind in southern Alberta.
Oh my gosh, that's scary.
It's a safety.
I didn't even think that's a possibility, but now that you said it,
well, you know, the wind can get pretty powerful down here in southern Alberta, so they put those measures in place. The construction of the bridge is actually considered a national historic event. Over 100 men worked on the construction of the bridge. There were a few deaths during the construction. Safety measures for workers were not what they are now. There is a very famous photograph of two men leaping off the last structure to be lowered into place. They were promptly fired after that. They did not die, but they were fired for their shenanigans.
Oh my gosh, I think I have seen that picture, and they're jumping basically into the river, right?
But they're jumping from the piece of steel off to the side of the
Yes,
bay.
where the
Yeah.
land is. Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's not as high as we think at that point. But
No.
still.
No.
Still. Safety first, gentlemen. Come on, let's not
Yeah.
give other people ideas, right?
You know, in the early 1900s, they didn't have fall safe harnesses. They didn't have
There
any
was
of
no
those
such
things.
thing as safety back then, basically.
That's right.
I
Which
get
may
it.
be one of the reasons why safety harnesses and whatnot were put into place
Yeah.
as we moved through the 19th and 20th centuries, because people did things like that. I don't know. That's just my speculation, but it makes sense.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so moving on from the bridge, we have a school named after, so we've got some other famous names here in town. So we have a school named after Nicholas Sharon and a hospital named after Sir Alexander Galt. And both were businessmen who started coal mines here. So to what degree did coal mining impact Lethbridge in the early years?
There were over 100 mines in the Lethbridge coal fields, somewhere between Picture Butte and McGrath. In 1919, we were the highest producing coal field in Canada. And it helped to determine where Lethbridge was built. It brought in industries such as Lethbridge Iron Works. Uh, it was a major employer, brought a lot of families to the area, and started other communities like Colehurst and Diamond City. Uh, it's almost impossible to quantify the importance of coal mining to our development. Uh, it it was the founding reason for Lethbridge's construction here. And then as we moved out of coal mining, that's when we moved into more of an agricultural community. But we definitely started as that industrial coal mining location. That's why the city sprang up where it did.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, in addition to that, Southern Alberta has a rich Indigenous history. So the River Valley has a park named Indian Battle Park, where Fort Whoop-Up is located. So maybe share a brief history about that.
The Indian Battle Park is the name that was chosen by City Council in the 1960s. And it specifically refers to a battle in the fall of 1870 between the Blackfoot Nations and the Cree Nations. It was a winter camping area protected from the weather and that. And where the high level bridge is now was a very natural crossing point in the river. Um, we do have a book about the Indian battle that went on there, several different editions. But the story of how these two nations fought over rights to the land and the ability to camp there, it's much more than I could cover in such a short time. But that's why it's named that, because our Indigenous peoples camped there and wintered there to stay safe from the elements.
Yeah, and then of course, speaking of Indigenous people, people from around the world travel to Alberta specifically to visit Head Smashed In Buffalo Jump. So for any viewers who have never heard about this or have ever been there, what is that all about?
Head Smashed In Buffalo Jump is it's a national historic site. It's a provincial heritage site and a World Heritage Site, all of which were designated through the 60s, late 60s into the early 80s. It's a place where the Indigenous peoples would drive the buffalo off the cliff in order to harvest them. It is definitely a fascinating interpretive center there. If you haven't been, I definitely recommend it. It's a very eye-opening look into how Indigenous people manage to hunt in such large capacities. And there are guides and books available online that give you a lot of the details of the history of the location. But where it's one of our national heritage sites that we're very proud to be quite close to Lethbridge.
Yeah, I believe it's a UNESCO heritage site, isn't it? Yeah,
yes.
That's amazing. Okay, now, Lori, and you mentioned agriculture earlier, and of course that is a big part of Southern Alberta, especially the sugar beet industry. So I believe that that also brought quite a few Japanese immigrants to our area. So maybe can you tell us a bit about that?
The sugar beet industry has been operating in Lethbridge to this day, since the early 1900s. You are correct. Some Japanese immigrants moved here. They were recruited to work in the first factory in Raymond and in the beet fields. Some of these families still, their descendants are still in and around Lethbridge. During the Second World War, 2,500 of these Japanese Canadians were relocated here by the government to work in the beet fields. It was considered later in life, it was considered a human rights violation to uproot these families and move them here with no choice in the matter. The Canadian government did issue an official apology to the families in 1988, but those families did settle here, and some of them remain here to this day, or at least parts of them. So the sugar beet industry has always been important to Lethbridge and agriculture, some for good reason, some for bad, obviously. I mean, history, we like to think of history as this happy, nostalgic style thing, but some of Canadian history is not pleasant and it's not nice. And we have to acknowledge that before we can move out of that cycle. They say history, those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. So by studying history and the real, honest, nitty-gritty facts about it, perhaps we can avoid those sorts of things as we grow and develop as a society.
Yeah, the more you learn about it, the more you can avoid it. And yeah, exactly. It's fascinating though, Lorian. And moving on from there, Lethbridge, an area are also known for its history of irrigation canals. Much of that was put in place by our Mormon community. So that of course, has really influenced the culture of Southern Alberta, hasn't it?
It has. Lethbridge and Southern Alberta, heavily Mormon. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. They've brought a lot and contributed a lot. The agreement was made by Alexander Galt with the LDS Church so that their settlers would build canals, and then they received land and money as payment for their work. They were brought in because they came from Utah originally, where they were experts in dryland farming and the different skills required. And it was able to transform the area around Lethbridge to make more crops possible because we needed high dollar value crops to be able to be grown here. So that it was sort of they got to move to somewhere new and get land and money for it. We got the benefit of their dryland farming knowledge and irrigation.
I am learning so much here. It's fascinating.
Lethbridge is so rich in history and how all of these things that we see now still. We drive over irrigation canals and we see the sugar beet factories, and we go down to the park and we see the mine sites of 6 and 8, Galt Mine 6 and 8, that are still, the ruins are still there. And Lethbridge exists because these things were brought in, and this area of the world was made hospitable.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's awesome. Thanks so much again for being with us today. It looks like we're out of time, but we really appreciate having you on here, Lorian.
Well, thank you so much. I would just like to mention that we do have several members-only tours coming up in April, June, and October. So if you'd like to get involved with the bars and taverns or the murder mysteries of Lethbridge's past, please go on our website, get a membership, and then those tours will be open for our members. And we welcome members of the public to our general meetings, again, the fourth Tuesday of every month, usually at the community room in the public library.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Lorian. Very, very interesting. Great to have you on today.
Thank you again for the invitation.
Absolutely. Lorian Johansson is the Vice President of the Lethbridge Historical Society. Well, far too many people have experienced childhood trauma. This has turned out to be devastating for many, while others have have somehow managed to overcome. Today's guest is one of the latter. Michael Menard is a childhood trauma expert who, despite having a traumatic childhood himself, has had remarkable success in life. He became the vice president of engineering at Johnson & Johnson and founded the group GenSight Group, a consulting and software company advising major corporations like Coca-Cola and NASA. He is a best-selling author. His latest book, The Kite That Couldn't Fly, will be released in June. Michael, welcome to Bridge City News. So great to have you on today and wonderful to meet you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Tell us about your upcoming book, The Kite That Couldn't Fly, and your inspiration for writing it. It's a deeply personal story, isn't it?
It is. It started as a memoir. I'm one of 14 children, and we grew up in a home of below the poverty line with a mother that was just a saint. A lovely woman of Christ who taught us about Christ and the Bible, and also with a father who was shaped by his own trauma. So we grew up in a home of neglect, abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, and we just thought that was life. So I decided to write a memoir about my experience as a childhood, really to just capture for my children and my grandchildren my story. And I included all my brothers and sisters, and I wrote the book, drafted the book. I asked a couple of psychiatrists and psychologists to join and to help me unpack the book and make sure I wasn't saying anything incorrect or triggering. And what that team said was that what I and my family experienced was complex childhood trauma, and immediately wanted to treat me and my siblings. I have never felt the need for treatment, but I understood the challenges of my childhood. Having said that, I went on to have a very successful career, as Jeanette listed there. But there was also some siblings that didn't fare as well. So there's this paradox of trauma. There's a paradox that is kind of not really known well, but some sufferers experience post-traumatic growth after childhood trauma. No one knows why. Others collapse under that pressure, and they experience disorders, anxiety, depression, failed relationships, addiction, medical issues. Several of my siblings fall into that category, sadly. I've lost two brothers to drug addiction that I'm quite sure had its roots in childhood trauma. No one knows why some of us wobble and some of us collapse within the same environment. But a very important note that if you are one of those who have experienced post-traumatic growth, you are not immune to the disorders that may erupt later in life. It doesn't make you exempt.
No, exactly. First of all, I'm very sorry to hear about your two siblings there. That's absolutely terrible. It looks like while researching for your book, you found there were a lot of findings that you've sort of discovered regarding childhood trauma.
It was amazing. So as part of this process, I mentioned I enlisted a panel of mental health experts to help me understand what happened and maybe offer some reflections to the reader after each chapter, so that it could help parents, help sufferers to do that. And when I talked to them, they were really shocked at the experiences of my experiences and my family. So they wanted me to go into therapy, which I rejected. But actually, some of my siblings have gone into therapy now with great results. So what I found, a couple of things. I found what the definition of childhood trauma is, and just to run through that quickly, the CDC talks about childhood trauma as events, and they call that an adverse childhood trauma. And that could be neglect. Neglect means not enough food, not enough shelter, not enough heat, no medical attention. And trauma isn't just about what happened to you. Trauma could also be about what didn't happen, and that's neglect. Then there's abuse, physical abuse, that's beatings and physical harm, sexual abuse, and then finally mental abuse, which is shaming, criticism, growing up in a home with fighting parents, which, by the way, is 1 out of 4 families in the U.S. today. Being raised in a home with addiction or mental illness, being from a fatherless home. There's 20 million children in North America that are living in fatherless homes, and that brings its own trauma. And finally, being a victim of separation or divorce. So that's childhood trauma. What I found, I went into a funk when I started the research, and I was uncharacteristically for me, I was experiencing depression, some anxiety, and I was going deep into the research, and I was mourning what I realized had happened to my siblings.
Yeah, you were opening up those wounds, and suddenly
exactly,
realizing.
and my wife saw the hole that I had dug, and that I was going deeper into that hole through this research and the suffering and actually reliving, and she lovingly grabbed my shoulder and said it was time to get out of the hole. And she suggested I grab that little boy's hand and go back to that May Avenue house and tell that child everything's going to be okay.
Oh, that's so emotional.
So that was a moment of release for me, and some therapy in of itself. So yeah, I found so much. I found that the big news in my mind, and what I hope the book can do or communicate, is that there is a crisis. There is a crisis worldwide. Dr. Glenn Giraldi, which has become my friend, and he's really the authority on childhood trauma, and he's written 7 books on the subject. He says that childhood trauma may well be called the #1 unaddressed public health concern in the world today, and that the trauma leaves devastation in the wake of everyone who's experienced it. So the CDC reports that in the US alone, there's 150 million adults walking around suffering from childhood trauma. That's 62%. Of those 150 million, 44 million have experienced complex childhood trauma, like me and my siblings. Those 44 million will die on an average of 20 years too soon. Just think about that. And it's happened in my family. My brothers died 50 years before their time. 41% of all depression in North America is from childhood trauma. There are 20 million, as I said, 20 million children in fatherless homes. There's 5 million children in foster care. They all suffer childhood trauma. And the World Health Organization says there's over 1 billion people in the world today that are suffering from childhood trauma.
You know, and in your book, Michael, you write that childhood trauma actually rewires the brain. Can you maybe unpack that a bit?
Yes, absolutely. I'll answer the question kind of what happens to a child that suffers this, and this is all new for me, and this is part of the mourning and the crisis, is that when a child experiences trauma, all the type of traumas that I mentioned, their brain chemistry changes, and it changes at the root of their brain, the deepest part of their brain. The brain development changes, their biology changes, and then in later life, even decades later, these disorders begin to appear unannounced. You know, we're taught to be aware, avoid danger, look both ways before you cross the street. But this type of danger you cannot prepare for. You just need to know that when it happens, there may be reasons why. And you know, the disorders come in the form of depression, anxiety, failed relationships, as I said, and a whole basket of medical ailments: high blood pressure, obesity, cancer. the top 5 causes of death come from childhood trauma. So it's, it's a silent crisis and a silent killer that I really stumbled upon just by the research of this book, and now I've had that research validated by all types of authorities, and most of them say it's even understated.
That is incredible. How would someone recognize that a child is going through a trauma? And I mean, if we saw that, how should we respond to it?
Yeah, it's there's 2 categories to be aware of. One is children that are being, in the school systems, and the churches should be watching for this. And this is just abnormal behavior. A child lashing out, a child being inappropriate with sexual talk or sexual action, anger, fits, wanting to hurt other people. That's what you see in children. And that's when it's happening. But years later, talking about adults from, let's say, 21 to death, what you find in those people are depression, anxiety, flare-ups, relationships in turmoil constantly for no real reason, health issues. In the book, The Body Keeps the Score, it's just a brilliant book on how the body deteriorates as a response to stress, and particularly childhood trauma stress. So those are the things to look for. And if you're feeling that something must change, you don't know what it is, something must change in your life, that could be a real reason to dig deeper and to find out maybe what happened to you.
Right. At what point in your life, Michael, did you realize that you had problems stemming from childhood trauma and that you needed to get some help?
Well, the first one, I was a young executive at Johnson & Johnson on a fast track. And because of the success and the potential for very high positions in the company, I was assigned a industrial therapist to see if I could live under the pressure of being the CEO, as an example.
Wow. Okay.
And through those tests, they said it's a slam dunk. I could do the job. But they found that my level of happiness, my well-being, on a scale of 1 to 10 was about a 2. And that my success was coming from, I didn't know then, but my success was coming from an addiction to material goods and success, when really what was happening is I just didn't want to run out of anything. And I didn't realize that until I'm now 73. And in this research and talking with the mental experts, I realized that's one of my addictions. That's one of my responses. In addition to that, I struggle with obesity. I struggle with eating too much and ordering that extra pizza because, again, I realize now that it was just from not wanting to be hungry. And it took me how many years? 60 years to figure that out and to deal with that.
Wow. Now we're almost out of time here, but your mom taught you about faith in Jesus, and you believe that prayer and faith are key to bringing healing to people suffering from childhood trauma. So maybe explain really quickly why that's so important.
Yeah, very, very quickly. My mother taught us the power of prayer. She taught us, I saw miracles. I know the power of prayer and I know that it works. But we as Christians suffer because we have this misbelief or mistranslation of the scripture, asking you shall receive. We think that kind of comes from maybe the name it and claim it theology that sounds great to the ear. But the Lord provides. He provides whatever we need and provides the healing. But prayer is not enough. I had a brother, he's 75, a man of God, has been trying to pray away his anxiety and depression for 20 years without success, wondering why the Lord has not been answering. his prayers. But through this research, he realized he was praying for the wrong thing. He needs to pray to align himself with God's will. And immediately he sought counseling and was treated by a Christian therapist using EMDR therapy for childhood trauma. And in 7 sessions, in 7 hours, he was rid of that, and he's pretty sure it's forever. So,
wow.
Churches are full of unhappy people, and church is partly the reason for that. Some churches, it's because they're praying for the wrong thing. They think good deeds and having more faith is going to heal them. It will not. Your pastor's not going to heal you. He may help, but you need to turn to what God has provided for us in physicians and therapists to reach fullness that he wants us, the fullness that he wants us to reach.
Wow, that's incredible. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but there's so much to unpack here. But thanks so much for being with us today and sharing your story, Michael. Really appreciate that.
Welcome, Jeanette.
Absolutely. Michael Menard is the author of The Kite That Couldn't Fly, which will be released in June. And it's available at thekitethатcouldn'tfly.com and anywhere that books are sold. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.